Okay, let's unpack this. Have you ever been in a situation where you needed to reach an agreement but felt caught in an impossible bind? On one hand, you could be too soft and, risk being taken advantage of, losing out on what you truly deserve.
Getting walked all over.
Exactly. Or, on the other hand, you could push too hard, burning bridges, damaging vital relationships, and leaving everyone feeling, resentful.
Yeah.
We've all faced this, whether it's haggling over a car, deciding on a family vacation, or, navigating complex professional deals. It feels like a fundamental, unavoidable dilemma in human interaction, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. And what's truly fascinating here is that this isn't just a personal feeling or some casual observation. It's a universal challenge, really, one that plays out on every stage, from the smallest boardroom negotiations right up to the most high-stakes international diplomacy. So today, we're taking a deep dive into a foundational text that offers a powerful and frankly refreshing alternative. Getting to Yes, Negotiating Agreement Without Giving In. It's a book that fundamentally reshapes how we think about conflict and cooperation.
And this isn't some abstract theory cooked up in an ivory tower, right?
Not at all.
This is a highly practical, rigorously tested method developed by Roger Fisher and William Ury from the renowned Harvard Negotiation Project, with significant contributions from Bruce Patton, too.
That's right.
And these aren't just academics. These are experts who have applied these very ideas in incredibly diverse and challenging fields. I mean, from international law and anthropology to consulting for governments and major corporations, even mediating in deeply entrenched conflicts like the Palestinian-Israeli one. Their core mission, and what we hope to bring to you today, is to help you achieve wise agreements efficiently and amicably without sacrificing your integrity or your interests.
And this really raises an important question for all of us, doesn't it? In a world where differences often lead to polarization, gridlock, or even outright conflict, is there truly a coherent, actionable way to achieve what you want while also preserving vital relationships and even finding genuine mutual gain?
That's the million-dollar question.
That's precisely what we're going to meticulously explore in this deep dive. We want to provide you with a clear, detailed shortcut to being well-informed on a method that promises exactly that. So get ready to rethink everything you thought you knew about getting to yes.
Okay, so before we jump into this groundbreaking solution, let's take a moment to really unpack the problem, the negotiation trap that so many of us just instinctively fall into.
Right.
Fisher, Ury, and Patton call this common, almost default approach, positional bargaining. It's probably something you've encountered or maybe even done yourself countless times.
That's right. Positional bargaining is basically when each side stakes out a firm stance, a position, and then argues aggressively for it, defending it against all comers. And eventually, maybe grudgingly, makes concessions to reach some kind of compromise. Think of that classic, almost cliche image, haggling over a secondhand brass dish in a bustling marketplace.
Yeah, I can picture it.
One side opens with $75, the other counters with $15. And they slowly, sometimes painfully, inch their way towards a middle ground. Maybe, $37.50. It feels familiar, right? We've all seen this play out or even been part of it.
We absolutely have. It feels like the default mode of negotiation for so many of us. It's kind of how we've been taught to win. And okay, it certainly tells the other side what you want, provides a clear starting point. But as the authors meticulously argue, this method fundamentally fails to produce a truly wise agreement efficiently and amicably.
Exactly.
It's less like a productive dialogue and more like a grueling contest of wills, where the only way to win is often to wear down your opponent, which ultimately doesn't serve anyone's best long-term interests.
And this is where it gets really interesting because the drawbacks of positional bargaining are significant, and they often go unnoticed or are just accepted as, part of the game.
Okay.
Let's break down precisely why this approach is actually so problematic. First off, it's incredibly inefficient.
Inefficient? How so?
Well, positional bargaining demands a tremendous amount of time and effort, far more than is necessary. Negotiators are essentially incentivized to start with extreme, often unrealistic positions.
The high ball thing.
Exactly. They're encouraged to hold out stubbornly, to bluff, maybe even deceive about their true views or bottom lines, and to only make small, grudging concessions when they absolutely have to, just to keep the discussion from collapsing entirely.
So it's all posturing.
A lot of it is.
Hmm.
This protracted back and forth isn't really about finding the best possible solution. It's more about seeing who can outlast who has the greater staying power. Consider the agonizing nuclear testing ban talks under President Kennedy. Negotiations completely broke down. And not over fundamental security interests, but over an arbitrary number.
Really?
Yeah. One side insisted on 3 on-site inspections, the other on no less than 10. And the truly absurd detail here, they hadn't even clarified what an inspection truly entailed.
I'm kidding.
No, was it 1 person for a day or 100 people for a month? They were just stuck on these symbolic numbers, wasting precious time and immense effort on rigid positions instead of exploring their underlying interests in, say, verifiable security versus minimal national intrusion. That's the very definition of inefficiency.
Wow. Okay, that's a big one. What else?
Second, and this is crucial, positional bargaining actively endangers relationships.
The human cost.
Yes. It transforms what could be a collaborative problem-solving exercise into an adversarial battle of wills. Each side relentlessly tries to force the other to change their stance, to bend to their will.
Yeah, that sounds familiar.
This quickly escalates into a rigid contest of I will versus I won't, and that leads to deep anger and profound resentment. One side inevitably feels they're being forced to bend to the other's rigid demands, while their own legitimate concerns are just dismissed.
Mm-hmm.
And relationships, whether they're commercial relationships between long-standing business partners or personal ones between neighbors, family members, even spouses, they can be severely strained or completely shattered by this adversarial approach. The bitter feelings generated can, unfortunately, last a lifetime, long after the specific deal is forgotten.
That's heavy. Okay, so inefficiency, damaged relationships, anything else?
And finally, the complexity worsens dramatically with multiple parties.
Oh yeah, I can imagine.
The more people involved in a negotiation, the more cumbersome, chaotic, and ultimately self-defeating positional bargaining becomes. Think of the immense complexities in large-scale international negotiations, like those involving 150 countries at UN conferences.
Right.
It might take everyone to say yes, but only one person needs to say no to derail everything.
Great.
Concessions become incredibly difficult to manage. It's unclear who you're making them to and what the ripple effects will be across this vast array of stakeholders. This often leads to the formation of coalitions among parties whose shared interests are maybe more symbolic than substantive, making their collective entrenched positions even harder to change. Once a group has painfully developed and publicly agreed upon a position, altering it becomes almost impossible, especially if additional participants, like higher authorities or political factions, must also give their approval. The entire process just grinds to a halt.
So, okay, if being a hard bargainer wears everyone down and risks destroying relationships, is the obvious counterintuitive answer just to be nice, to be soft? The authors are pretty clear. Being nice is no answer, which sounds appealing, but why isn't it the solution? Why can't we just all be accommodating?
Yeah, it's tempting, right? But unfortunately, no. Many people, understandably recognizing the high personal and professional costs of hard positional bargaining, instinctively try a soft style.
Makes sense. Avoid the fight.
Exactly. They try to avoid conflict at all costs, readily make concessions, maybe blandly trust the other side's intentions, and emphasize reaching any agreement above all else.
Okay.
And while this approach can certainly produce quick agreements, often to the soft negotiator's relief, these agreements are frequently sloppy, not wise.
Yeah.
They might not genuinely serve either party's long-term interests and often leave the soft negotiator feeling deeply unsatisfied. Think of that poignant O. Henry story, The Gift of the Magi. The loving wife sells her most valuable possession, her beautiful hair, to buy a handsome chain for her husband's prized watch.
Right, I know this one.
And unbeknownst to her, the equally loving husband sells his most valuable possession, his watch, to buy beautiful combs for his wife's hair. It's touching, it's loving, driven by a desire to please.
But
ultimately, a deeply foolish trade-off that leaves both worse off. This perfectly illustrates how a negotiation primarily concerned with preserving the relationship at all costs can produce a suboptimal, even tragic agreement.
And I guess, even worse, a soft approach leaves you completely exposed to a hard bargainer.
Absolutely. If one side is relentlessly insisting on concessions, making veiled threats, adopting a rigid stance, while the other is yielding primarily to avoid confrontation, well, the hard game completely dominates the soft one.
Yeah.
The soft negotiator will likely lose their shirt, ending up with an agreement that is overwhelmingly favorable to the hard positional bargainer. You'll probably feel exploited, resentful, and you certainly won't have achieved a wise or equitable outcome.
Okay, so What does this all mean for us? The dilemma seems glaringly clear. Hard bargaining hurts relationships, it's inefficient, often leads to arbitrary outcome. But soft bargaining leaves you vulnerable, exploited, and results in sloppy agreements.
Right. Both lead to suboptimal results for everyone involved.
So what's the answer?
The authors argue with profound clarity that the solution is to entirely change the fundamental game we're playing. We need a completely different approach, a sort of metagame that steps outside the traditional hard versus soft dichotomy altogether.
So if those two seemingly intuitive paths lead to dead ends, if we can't be soft and we can't be hard, how do we truly break free from this no-win dilemma?
Yeah, what's the way out?
This is where Fisher, Ury, and Patton introduce a truly revolutionary third way, a foundational shift in how we approach negotiation, which they call principled negotiation.
Okay. Principled negotiation.
It's about being hard on the merits, meaning firmly advocating for your legitimate underlying interests, but crucially, soft on the people, ensuring the human relationship remains intact, respected, and maybe even strengthened.
Hard on merit, soft on people. I like that.
It's a method that avoids tricks and posturing, showing you precisely how to get what you're entitled to while still being a decent, honorable person.
This method, at its core, it really boils down to 4 basic points, or pillars, designed explicitly to overcome the fundamental problems inherent in positional bargaining.
4 pillars.
It's truly an all-purpose strategy, and perhaps surprisingly, it actually becomes easier to use if the other side also understands it. In fact, the authors jokingly suggest that if the other side reads getting to yes, well, all the better for everyone involved.
Okay, let's get into these pillars. What's the first one? This first pillar feels like the absolute core, the foundation upon which everything else rests. Because at the end of the day, every negotiation involves human beings.
Absolutely.
And human beings are, by nature, prone to intense emotions, misperceptions, constant communication breakdowns. It's so incredibly easy to take things personally, especially when the stakes are high.
It really is.
And our natural inclination is to conflate the person sitting across the table with the very problem we're trying to solve.
You're absolutely right. It is the core. The authors emphasize that in any negotiation, you invariably have 2 distinct kinds of interests at play. Your interest in the substance of the agreement itself, and your interest in the ongoing relationship with the other party.
Substance and relationship, got it.
Think of an antiques dealer, for instance. They don't just want to make maximum profit on a single sale of, say, a rare vase. They also want to cultivate that customer into a regular patron, ensuring future business and a steady livelihood.
Right, the long game.
Exactly. These 2 interests, the substantive and the relational, often become deeply and unhelpfully entangled, leading to unproductive conflict where people's egos or emotions override rational problem solving.
Can you give us a concrete example of how substance and relationships get tangled up like that, just to make it really clear how it messes things up?
Certainly. Imagine a union leader asking a foreman, "Why is Jones always on replacement detail? It feels like you're singling him out."
Okay.
Jones, already feeling put upon or suspicious, might deduce that the foreman has it in for him. But the foreman, let's call him Campbell, is genuinely surprised. He replies, "Jones, I pick him precisely because he's the best. I trust him with key roles when someone crucial is missing, especially with the flu going around."
So a complete misinterpretation.
A complete misinterpretation based on fear. Jones's underlying fear of being disliked led him to deduce negative intent when Campbell thought he was offering a compliment, a recognition of skill. If not immediately untangled, this simple misperception could easily escalate into a major, costly labor dispute.
Wow.
Or consider an insurance company lawyer trying to discuss a problematic new regulation with a state commissioner. The lawyer carefully tries to explain the unfair impact of a particular clause, but the commissioner, who personally drafted and championed that provision, feels personally attacked, interrupting with, "Are you saying I made a mistake? Are you saying I'm unfair?" Here, the commissioner's ego and sense of personal responsibility are inextricably tied to the substantive issue of the regulation, making any objective, rational discussion nearly impossible.
Okay, so the challenge isn't just that these issues exist, but how do we consciously, systematically untangle them? The author suggests focusing on 3 basic, often interconnected categories of people problems: perception, emotion, and communication. And crucially, these techniques apply just as much to your own problems and reactions as they do to theirs. Our own anger, frustration, and one-sided perceptions can be just as significant a barrier.
That's a really important point. It's not just about them. #1, perception.
Right. So starting with perception, Understanding the other side's thinking isn't just, a useful activity that might help you solve your problem. The authors boldly state that their thinking is the problem.
Whoa. Okay, unpack that. Their thinking is the problem.
Yes. Differences in negotiations are defined by the gap, the divergence between your thinking and theirs, whether it's quarreling over who caused a car accident or which nation legitimately owns a disputed territory. People often mistakenly assume they just need more data about the objective facts.
So it's not simply about the objective reality, like the exact skid marks at an accident scene or the historical facts of a disputed border, but fundamentally about how each side perceives and interprets that reality. Precisely. The internal narrative, the subjective lens through which they view the situation, is often far more powerful and influential than external facts alone. You need to actively, consciously put yourself in their shoes. As the saying goes, how you see the world fundamentally depends on where you sit.
Right.
People have a natural tendency to selectively focus on facts that confirm their existing perceptions and conveniently disregard or misinterpret anything that calls their cherished views into question. Each side may genuinely see only the merits of its own case and only the faults of the others.
Like the classic tenant and landlady example.
Exactly. Consider the contrasting perceptions. The tenant is convinced the rent is exorbitant and the apartment desperately needs painting. Meanwhile, the landlady is equally convinced the rent hasn't increased in ages and the tenant has caused excessive wear and tear. Their perceptions are diametrically opposed, yet both feel completely undeniably justified.
That makes so much sense. It's not enough to intellectually acknowledge that they see things differently. You need to grasp the power of their point of view, to truly understand the emotional force and conviction behind it. The authors use that vivid analogy. It's like knowing what it feels like to be a beetle. You have to genuinely empathize, to temporarily suspend your own judgment and try on their views, even if you fundamentally disagree.
Precisely. Only then can you begin to maybe shift their perspective. And a crucial, often overlooked point, don't deduce their intentions from your fears.
Don't deduce intentions from fears. Okay.
Yeah. We have a powerful, often subconscious tendency to assume the worst, interpreting the other side's actions in the most dismal, malevolent light.
Yeah, we do that.
The authors recount a powerful story from the New York Times. A man offers a woman a ride home, takes unfamiliar side streets, says it's a shortcut, gets her home so fast she catches the 10 o'clock news. Why is the ending so surprising?
Because you expect something bad to happen.
Exactly. Because our fears and ingrained biases lead us to expect a nefarious outcome. This habit of assuming the worst, of projecting our anxieties onto their actions, actively prevents fresh ideas and constructive dialogue. It keeps us locked in a defensive posture.
And don't blame them for your problem, even if it feels completely justified.
Right. It's consistently counterproductive. Telling a service provider your company is totally unreliable, you've ruined everything, will just make them immediately defensive, shut them down.
So what do you do instead?
Instead, the approach is to separate the symptoms from the person. Focus rigorously on the observable facts and their direct impact on you. Our rotary generator, which your company services, has broken down 3 times this month, costing us significant downtime. I need your advice on minimizing these breakdowns going forward. See the difference.
Yeah, it framed it as a shared problem to solve, not a personal accusation.
Exactly. Another highly effective technique is to explicitly, openly discuss each other's perceptions, just getting it out there. This kind of frank, non-blaming discussion can dramatically build mutual understanding. It's also vital to actively look for opportunities to act inconsistently with their ingrained perceptions of you.
Act inconsistently, like how?
A truly powerful example is President Sadat's historic visit to Jerusalem in 1977. Israelis had long perceived Sadat and Egypt as their absolute enemy, a constant threat.
Right.
But by Sadat flying into the enemy capital, a disputed capital, no less, he fundamentally, viscerally altered their perception of him. Instead of acting as an intractable foe, he acted as a brave, committed partner seeking peace.
Wow, that must have been huge.
It was absolutely critical to creating the psychological shift necessary for the eventual peace treaty. It was a dramatic, unexpected move.
That's a powerful aha moment right there.
Yeah.
It's about sending a clear, undeniable message, one that so directly defies their expectations. It forces them to reconsider their whole view of you. And to truly secure their commitment, their full buy-in, the authors emphasize. Give them a genuine stake in the outcome,
by ensuring they participate in the process of shaping it.
Yes, absolutely. This is key.
If they aren't involved in crafting the solution, it's far less likely they'll truly approve the final product.
Exactly. This is especially true when dealing with emotionally charged or difficult issues. Our instinct is often to leave the hard part, the joint problem solving, until last. We try to work everything out internally on our side before presenting a finished proposal.
Right. Polish it perfectly first.
But think about it. An insurance commissioner is far more likely to enthusiastically agree to a revised regulation if he helped draft it himself. It becomes a natural step in his process, not an attempt to butcher his completed product.
Good point.
The stark example of white moderates in South Africa trying to abolish unjust past laws through an all-white committee, well, it clearly highlights the futility of excluding those most affected. Their proposals, however meritorious in theory, were dead on arrival because they completely excluded Black participation and ownership.
Yeah, makes sense.
Agreement becomes infinitely easier and far more durable when both parties feel a genuine sense of ownership over the ideas. Each constructive criticism offered, each suggested change incorporated, leaves a personal mark on the proposal, making the final solution feel inherently theirs.
So, involvement, early participation, asking for advice.
Asking advice, giving generous credit where it's these are all absolutely key. The authors put it brilliantly. In a sense, the process is the product.
Process is the product. I like that.
And let's not forget the crucial aspect of face-saving, allowing the other party to reconcile an agreement with their self-image, their past positions, and their constituents' expectations. It's hugely important, often underestimated. #tag 2. Emotion.
Okay, let's move to the next big people problem. Emotion. Emotions unaddressed can quickly bring any negotiation to a complete impasse. Fear breeds anger. Anger breeds more fear. It creates this debilitating vicious cycle that can derail any progress. So how do we effectively deal with that, especially when things inevitably get heated and personal?
Well, first, you must actively recognize and understand emotions, theirs and yours. Before even engaging, take a moment to identify what you yourself are truly feeling. Are you nervous, angry, frustrated?
Check in with yourself.
Exactly. And how would you prefer to feel? Confident, relaxed, open to possibilities. Remember that negotiators are deeply complex people with hopes, fears, anxieties, egos, not just emotionless mouthpieces representing organizations.
Right, they're human.
Their careers may be at stake. They may have personal sensitivities, take immense pride in certain areas. Constituents also have emotions, often even more simplistic or adversarial views. Acknowledging this internal landscape is the first critical step.
So make emotions explicit and acknowledge them as legitimate. Don't just ignore them or pretend they aren't there.
Precisely. Don't shy away from them. Bring them into the light. Talk openly about your side's frustrations and fears.
Yeah.
You might say something like, the people on our side feel we have been significantly mistreated and are currently very upset. We're also genuinely afraid that an agreement, even if reached, will not be kept. Rational or not, that is a very real concern for us. This open, honest acknowledgement not only underscores the seriousness of the underlying problem, but also, paradoxically, frees people to constructively work on it. It makes negotiations less reactive, more proactive.
And crucially, avoid reacting to emotional outbursts from the other side. That's hard, though. Our natural inclination when someone raises their voice or gets aggressive is to counterattack, defend ourselves.
It is hard. But reacting usually leads to a violent quarrel and completely derails any potential progress. It's like throwing fuel on a fire.
So what do you do instead?
Well, this is where a clever procedural rule can work wonders. The steel industry's Human Relations Committee back in the 1950s had a brilliant, simple rule.
Yeah.
Only one person could get angry at a time.
Seriously, that was the rule.
That was a rule. It legitimized the outburst, making it easier for the person to vent without feeling they had to suppress genuine feelings. But crucially, it prevented others from responding stormily, effectively breaking that reactive cycle. Wow.
It also subtly encouraged self-control, because breaking this agreed-upon rule meant losing face. This perfectly highlights how a clear, mutually agreed-upon procedural agreement can proactively manage even the strongest emotions.
That's truly brilliant. A seemingly simple rule with such profound effect on the dynamic. What about other, maybe less direct ways to shift the emotional tone? especially outside of a formal discussion.
Absolutely. Use symbolic gestures. Any seasoned lover knows that a simple red rose, a heartfelt note of sympathy, or a small thoughtful gift can go an incredibly long way to mend a quarrel or ease tension.
The small things.
Acts that produce a constructive emotional impact often cost very little in terms of resources, but can be absolutely priceless in profoundly improving a hostile or strained situation. A genuine handshake, sharing a meal, even just a visit, can bridge deep emotional divides.
And apologies. An apology, even when offered without admitting formal fault or legal responsibility, can be unbelievably effective in diffusing intense emotions. It's often one of the least costly and most rewarding investments you can make to clear the air, acknowledge pain, and allow productive dialogue to resume. Hashtag 3. Communication.
Okay, the third people problem. Communication. Even when you believe you're talking as clearly as possible, there's always the risk they might not be genuinely hearing or understanding you, or vice versa. We're often so intensely busy preparing our next brilliant argument, or so focused on our own internal monologue or what our constituents might want, that we completely forget to genuinely listen to the person right across the table. It's a fundamental paradox.
It's an enormous problem in negotiation, truly a silent killer of potential agreements. The standard techniques of good, active listening are absolutely crucial here.
Like what specifically?
Paying meticulous attention, asking them to spell out what they mean clearly, not hesitating to request repetitions if anything feels ambiguous. Your core task, while you are listening, is not to phrase your next devastating response.
Right, not planning your comeback.
But rather to understand their perceptions, their needs, and their unique constraints as they genuinely see them. It's about deep comprehension.
So you're suggesting a good negotiator actually does the exact reverse of what many might instinctively think. That they give the other side's case a tremendous amount of attention and even acknowledge its legitimacy rather than immediately trying to refute it. That goes against so much competitive training.
It does, but it's remarkably effective. Unless you clearly demonstrate that you've heard and understood them, they simply won't genuinely listen to your viewpoint.
So how do you show that?
You might say, let me see whether I follow what you are telling me. From your point of view, the situation looks like this. As you repeat what you understood, phrase it as positively as possible from their perspective, clearly highlighting the strength of their case. You can perfectly understand someone and still completely disagree with them, but they absolutely need to know you've grasped their perspective. If you can make their case for them, perhaps even better than they can themselves, then calmly and respectfully refute it. Well, you maximize the chances of constructive dialogue. You minimize the risk of them just dismissing your arguments because they think you misunderstood them.
Okay, that's powerful. And what about how we phrase our own contributions? How can we ensure we're being heard without provoking that immediate defensive reaction?
Always speak about yourself, not about them.
I say statements.
Essentially, yes. Describe the problem's impact on you, your organization, or your interests, rather than making accusations about what they did or why they did it. Instead of saying you broke your word, you're completely untrustworthy, say, I feel incredibly let down by this outcome, and it concerns me about our future agreements. Instead of you're a racist, say, we feel discriminated against, and that makes it very difficult to trust the process. A statement about how you feel, your perceptions, your experience, it's difficult for them to challenge directly. And it conveys crucial information without provoking that immediate, instinctive, defensive reaction that will just prevent them from taking in what you're saying. It shifts the focus from blame to impact.
So what does all this meticulous attention to perception, emotion, and communication ultimately mean for our overall approach to people problems in any negotiation? What's the big picture here?
The ultimate takeaway is that prevention is always best. Consciously build strong personal and organizational relationships before negotiation even begins.
Before the conflict starts.
Exactly. Take the time to get to know them informally, arrive early to chat, linger a bit after a meeting. Benjamin Franklin famously used a simple trick. He asked an adversary for a favor, which flattered the person and subtly created a comfortable feeling of connection. More importantly, always relentlessly face the problem, not the people. See yourselves as partners in a hard-headed, side-by-side search for a fair agreement that is truly advantageous to each party.
Like the shipwreck analogy.
Exactly, like two shipwrecked sailors jointly trying to save a rapidly sinking lifeboat. They might start as adversaries over limited rations or blame, But to survive, they absolutely must disentangle the objective problems from their personal relationship, identify each other's fundamental needs, and then treat meeting those needs as a shared problem. You can literally change your physical arrangement. Sit on the same side of the table and focus on a shared document or whiteboard. This reinforces that you are both facing a common challenge. Separating people from the problem isn't a one-time fix. It's an ongoing, conscious effort, a constant commitment to dealing with the people as fellow human beings and the substantive problem purely on its merits.
Okay, pillar 1, separate the people from the problem. Huge. Once we've consciously handled that often tricky people problem and established a more collaborative environment, we can then effectively move to the substance.
Right. And here the authors make a profoundly counterintuitive but absolutely crucial point. The biggest, most common mistake in negotiation is focusing narrowly on positions, what you demand, rather than probing for underlying interests, which is precisely why you want it.
Yes. The famous librarian story perfectly, exquisitely illustrates this point.
Oh, the window story.
The window story.
Mm-hmm.
Two men are passionately quarreling over a single open window in a library. One wants it open, the other insists it be closed. They bicker endlessly over how wide to open it, how much to close it, focusing on positions. The astute librarian, instead of focusing on their opposing positions, wisely asks why each man wants it open or closed. She uncovers their underlying interests.
Yeah.
One wants fresh air, the other wants to avoid a draft.
The underlying need.
Understanding their true motivations, she simply opens a window in the next room, satisfying both fundamental interests without requiring either to compromise on their initial rigid positions. This is the essence of principled negotiation, leading to a truly wise and creative solution. That's such an aha moment, truly. So positions are the specific, often rigid demands you state.
I want the window open 6 inches.
And interests are the deeper motivations, the why behind those demands what you really want or need.
I need fresh air, or I need to avoid a draft. Exactly. Interests are the motivations, the underlying needs, the fears, the desires, the silent movers operating beneath the surface hubbub of positions.
Got it.
The Egyptian-Israeli peace treaty from Camp David in 1978 provides a stunning real-world example. Their initial positions were fundamentally incompatible. Israel insisted on keeping parts of the Sinai Peninsula for security reasons. Egypt vehemently insisted on total sovereignty over every inch of its ancestral land.
Total deadlock, sounds like.
Pretty much. Maps were drawn, compromises suggested, all based on these rigid positions, but none were acceptable. But when American mediators helped them pivot and look at their core interests, a breakthrough emerged.
What were the interests?
Israel's fundamental interest was security. They absolutely did not want Egyptian tanks massed on their border. Egypt's core interest was sovereignty. The Sinai had been Egyptian for millennia, and they had only recently regained full control.
Different needs.
Different, but not entirely conflicting once you look deeper. The brilliant solution, which only emerged from understanding these distinct interests, was to return Sinai to complete Egyptian sovereignty.
Okay, so Egypt gets sovereignty.
But to demilitarize large areas. The Egyptian flag would fly everywhere, symbolizing sovereignty, but Egyptian tanks would be nowhere near Israel, ensuring security. Both core interests were satisfied without either side abandoning their fundamental need.
That's a perfect illustration of why reconciling interests works so powerfully. Because, as you said, there are almost always multiple positions that could potentially satisfy an underlying interest.
Exactly.
And perhaps even more surprisingly, we often have many more shared or compatible interests with the other side than we have conflicting ones. It's not nearly as zero-sum as we often assume.
Absolutely. Think about a simple tenant and landlord negotiation again. Their positions on rent may appear to conflict directly. One wants higher, the other lower.
The classic fight.
But they share profoundly powerful, often unstated interests. Stability, right? A stable tenant, a permanent address, regular rent payments,
Okay.
a reliably maintained property.
True. Both want that.
A well-maintained apartment, a good ongoing relationship, responsive repairs, respectful communication. They might also have divergent but not conflicting interests, like the tenant's severe allergy to fresh paint versus the landlord's desire to avoid repainting all units this year.
Okay, so not directly opposed.
Right. These shared and divergent interests unlock the door for genuinely creative solutions, like a longer lease term for stability, shared costs for certain improvements, or maybe the landlord paints the apartment if the tenant agrees to buy the specific low VOC hypoallergenic paint.
Finding those trade-offs.
Exactly. This systematic approach clarifies the only remaining point of pure contention, the precise rental amount, which can then be settled based on objective criteria, which we'll get to.
This is great. But these hidden interests, especially the non-monetary ones, are often unexpressed, intangible, or even seem inconsistent to an outsider. How do we practically figure out what they truly are? It seems tricky.
It can be, but the authors offer two exceptionally powerful, almost deceptively simple questions to unlock these hidden interests. First, always ask why.
Just ask why.
Yes, but strategically.
Mm-hmm.
Put yourself rigorously in their shoes. Why does the landlord prefer a 5-year lease year by year over a shorter fixed term? The answer you might deduce is perhaps to protect against increasing costs or to secure a predictable income stream. That's a core interest. Or you can ask them directly, but clarify your intent. You're not seeking justification for their position, but genuinely trying to understand their underlying needs, hopes, fears, or aspirations. What's your basic concern, Mr. Jones, in wanting the lease for no more than 3 years? What are you hoping to achieve with that time frame?
Got it. And the second question.
Second, ask why not. Identify the specific decision you want them to make, for instance. Agree to our proposal. Then meticulously ask yourself why they haven't made it already. What specific interests, stated or unstated, stand in their way?
Why haven't they said yes yet?
Exactly. The Iranian hostage crisis provides a powerful, if tragic, illustration. By carefully analyzing the balance sheet of a typical student leader's perceived choice, the pros and cons of releasing the American hostages from their perspective, it became vividly clear why holding the hostages seemed rational to them.
How so?
Factors like upholding the Iranian Revolution, gaining international TV coverage, or protecting against perceived U.S. intervention weighed heavily against the costs of international sanctions. It wasn't necessarily an irrational decision given their perceived choice. It was entirely understandable from their complex point of view. This exercise helps you unearth the hidden motivations that actively prevent agreement.
So it's about going beyond just the obvious, tangible demands like money. It's about understanding their multiple, often layered interests, encompassing not just economic concerns, but deeper fundamental human needs like security, economic well-being, a sense of belonging, recognition for their contributions, genuine control over one's own life or destiny.
Yes, exactly. Like the example of a wife asking for $500 in alimony, she might also, or even primarily, be seeking psychological security and recognition of her past contributions to the marriage, not just the cash itself. Her financial interest is intricately connected to these deeper human needs, and this applies equally to groups and nations. The U.S.-Mexico natural gas negotiation in the 70s starkly showed Mexico's very strong, often overlooked, interest in respect and equality.
Which the U.S. missed.
Completely missed by focusing only on the price per cubic foot. The U.S. Secretary of Energy refused a price increase, assuming Mexico would just lower its asking price in desperation. Instead, Mexico, feeling bullied and disrespected, began to burn off the gas, making agreement impossible.
Wow. Out of principle.
Out of a need for respect. Similarly, Protestant leaders in Northern Ireland often tragically overlooked Catholics' deep-seated need for belonging and recognition, while Catholic leaders sometimes missed Protestants' fundamental need for security. Treating their fears as simply their problem, rather than a legitimate concern needing your thoughtful attention, makes a solution far, far more difficult.
So what's the practical tip here?
Always make a list of interests for both sides. It helps organize your thoughts, identify potential common ground, and uncover those powerful hidden motivators.
Okay, make a list. Once we've meticulously figured out these underlying interests, both ours and theirs, how do we then talk about them constructively without immediately getting locked back into those rigid, unhelpful positions? It's one thing to understand them, quite another to communicate them effectively in the heat of negotiation.
Excellent question. There are several key principles here. First, explain your interests clearly and make them come alive.
Make them vivid.
Yes. If you have a raging ulcer, you don't call it a mild stomachache to your doctor. It's your responsibility to ensure the other side understands exactly how important, how legitimate, and how deeply felt your interests are. Be specific. Use concrete details. They add immense impact and credibility.
Like the truck example.
Exactly. Instead of vaguely saying, your trucks are dangerous on our street, say, 3 times this week, a child was almost run over by your truck. On Tuesday morning, a huge red gravel truck, going at least 40 miles per hour, barely missed Loretta Johnson, who is 7 years old as she walked to school. We've had sleepless nights over this. See? It makes your concern palpable and undeniable.
Yeah, much more powerful. Okay, what's next?
Second, acknowledge their interest as an integral part of the overall problem you're both trying to solve.
Show you understand them.
Yes, people listen significantly better if they feel that you have truly understood them. You might say, as I understand it, your interests as a construction company are to get the job done quickly, at minimum cost, and to preserve your reputation for safety. Have I understood you correctly? Do you have any other important interests that I've missed?
Okay.
Then pivot to show shared interests. It would, of course, be absolutely terrible for all of us if one of your trucks hit a child. That would have devastating consequences for everyone involved. This demonstrates genuine empathy and reframes the problem as a shared challenge, not an adversarial one.
Okay, acknowledge theirs.
Third, and this is crucial for sequencing, put the problem and the interests before your proposed answer.
Explain why before what.
Right. If you immediately tell the construction company you need to build a fence around that site within 48 hours, they'll instantly prepare arguments against your specific solution, and your justifications will likely be ignored.
Mhm.
Instead, first, meticulously explain the danger to the children in your sleepless nights. Then, when you propose the fence, they'll be listening intently to understand why you're proposing that particular solution. They'll be listening to understand your interests, not just to refute your position.
Sequence matters. Got it. Fourth.
Fourth, look forward, not back. It's surprising how often we get bogged down arguing about past grievances, who was at fault yesterday, what happened last quarter.
Oh yeah, the blame game.
You will satisfy your interests much more effectively if you consistently talk about where you would like to go in the future, rather than endlessly dissecting where you have come from. Focus relentlessly on who should do what tomorrow, or what steps can we both take next week. This keeps the conversation productive, solution-oriented.
Okay, forward-looking. Fifth.
Be concrete but maintain flexibility. Go into any meeting with specific options that you believe would genuinely meet your interests, but always treat them as illustrations, not rigid positions.
Illustrative specificity.
That's what the authors call it. For example, in a high-stakes baseball contract negotiation, an agent might say, $5 million a year would be the kind of figure that should comfortably satisfy Henderson's interest in receiving the salary he feels he's worth. And something on the order of a 5-year contract should adequately meet his need for long-term job security.
So you're giving examples.
Exactly. This communicates your interests concretely with specific, tangible examples while simultaneously remaining completely open to fresh ideas and alternative structural agreements that might meet both parties' needs equally well. An open mind is not an empty one, it's a prepared one.
Concrete but flexible. Okay. And finally,
and this really encapsulates the essence of principled negotiation. Be hard on the problem, but consistently soft on the people.
back to that core idea.
You have every right, and indeed it is often advisable, to be just as hard, just as firm in talking about your underlying interests as any traditional negotiator would be in talking about their rigid position. Commit yourself fully to your interests, not to your positions. This strong advocacy for your needs can actually stimulate the other side's creativity in finding mutually advantageous solutions you might not have thought of. Don't let your desire for conciliation stop you from doing full justice to the problem and your legitimate concerns.
So be firm.
Be firm, but respectful. If a construction company is clearly ignoring safety to cut costs, you might say, with firm but respectful tone, surely you're not genuinely saying that my son's life is worth less than the cost of a fence. You wouldn't say that about your own child. I don't believe you're an insensitive person, Mr. Jenkins. So let's figure out together how to solve this safety issue effectively and without delay.
Wow, that's direct but respectful.
It's that powerful combination of support to the person and a relentless attack on the core problem. It works. It's about being both incredibly firm on the merits and genuinely open to their perspective. You can hardly expect them to listen intently to your interests if you don't take theirs into account with equal seriousness.
Okay, pillar 2. Focus on interests, not positions. That feels huge. Now, pillar 3. Invent options for mutual gain. This is where we truly get to be creative, right?
Exactly. This is the brainstorming phase.
But it often feels like in the real world, we're stuck just looking for that single elusive right answer. Or worse, that all solutions simply lie somewhere exactly in the middle of our initial demands. This kind of limited thinking can really block breakthroughs.
You've hit on a crucial point. That limited thinking is, in fact, one of the 4 major obstacles the authors identify to inventing an abundance of options for mutual gain.
4 obstacles. Okay, what are they?
Well, first is premature judgment. We are all incredibly quick to criticize and dismiss ideas, even our own, before they're fully formed.
Yeah, we shoot things down too fast.
We might fear looking foolish by suggesting something out there, or worry about disclosing information that could inadvertently jeopardize our bargaining position. Like, if you suggest your company help finance a house you're buying, your boss might mistakenly conclude you're not planning to leave and will therefore accept any meager raise. This pervasive fear of judgment, the self-censorship, profoundly stifles creativity.
Okay, premature judgment. What's second?
The second major obstacle is searching for the single answer. We often, almost unconsciously, view negotiation as a linear process of narrowing the gap between positions, not broadening the universe of possibilities.
Like finding the one magic bullet.
Right. We think we're already having a hard enough time agreeing as it is. The last thing we need is a bunch of different, potentially confusing ideas thrown into the mix. But looking for the single best answer from the outset completely short-circuits a wiser, more robust decision-making process where you select the optimal solution from a large, diverse number of possibilities. It's a form of premature closure.
Makes sense. Third obstacle.
The third obstacle, perhaps the most insidious, is the assumption of a fixed pie.
Ah, the zero-sum game idea.
Exactly. We tend to view negotiation almost instinctively as purely zero-sum. If you gain $100 on the price of a car, then I must lose $100. This either mentality, the scarcity mindset, makes us believe that satisfying the other side can only come at our own direct expense. And this deeply ingrained belief completely removes any incentive to invent options for mutual gain, because if the pie is fixed, what's there to invent?
Right. Why bother trying to expand it?
Okay, and the fourth obstacle is thinking solving their problem is their problem.
Uh-oh. That's familiar.
This short-sighted, often self-centered concern makes it incredibly difficult to achieve the detachment necessary to think up wise ways of meeting the interests of both sides. We might even feel it's disloyal to our own side to even consider solutions that primarily benefit them. This often leads to proposals that are purely partisan and one-sided, despite the undeniable fact that your own long-term satisfaction often depends directly on the other side being content enough to genuinely want to live up to the agreement. Their problem is your problem if you want a durable solution.
Those mental blocks are so real, so common. So how do we practically, consciously overcome these ingrained patterns of thinking that keep us stuck in such limited, often unproductive solution spaces?
The answer lies in brainstorming, but done correctly. The fundamental idea here is to completely separate the act of inventing options from the act of deciding on them.
Separate inventing from deciding.
Okay, this intentional separation creates a safe, expansive space for true creativity to flourish. The authors lay out specific, detailed guidelines for doing this effectively.
Like what?
Well, before brainstorming begins, first, clearly define your purpose. What specific problem are you trying to solve? Second, choose a few participants, ideally 5 to 8 people. Enough for stimulating interchange, small enough for participation. Third, consciously change the environment. Pick a time and place distinct from your regular, more formal discussions. This encourages a psychological shift, maybe a comfortable lounge, somewhere different.
Get out of the usual meeting room.
Exactly. Fourth, design an informal atmosphere, anything that helps everyone relax. Maybe take off ties, use first names, provide refreshments. And fifth, choose a facilitator whose job is to keep things on track, ensure everyone speaks, enforce the rules, and gently stimulate discussion.
Okay, that's the prep. What about during the session itself?
During the brainstorming session, first, and this is surprisingly impactful, seat the participants side by side facing the problem, maybe a whiteboard or easel. This physical arrangement powerfully reinforces the psychological attitude of jointly tackling a common problem, as opposed to facing each other across a table.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Facing the problem, not each other.
Second, clarify and relentlessly enforce the no criticism rule. Wild ideas are not just tolerated, they are explicitly encouraged, no negative criticism of any kind. The goal here is quantity over quality, volume of ideas.
Just get them all out there.
Third, let imaginations go wild. Approach the question from every conceivable angle, no matter how outlandish it seems initially. And fourth, record all ideas in full view on a blackboard or large newsprint. This creates a tangible sense of achievement, reinforces the no criticism rule, reduces repetition, and visually stimulates even more ideas.
Okay, no criticism, record everything. What happens after the brainstorm?
After brainstorming, first, star the most promising ideas. Now you can relax the no criticism rule a bit and nominate which ideas seem most promising, worthy of further development. Still not deciding, just identifying potential.
Narrowing it down slightly.
Second, invent improvements for promising ideas. Take a starred idea and consciously think of ways to make it better, more realistic, more comprehensive, how it might actually be carried out. When offering constructive criticism, maybe preface it with, what I like best about that idea is, might it be even better if?
Build on the good ideas.
And finally, set up a specific time to evaluate ideas and make a decision. Draw up a selective and improved list and schedule when to advance them in the actual negotiation, moving from the creative phase to the analytical and decision-making phase.
Okay, that's a clear process. The authors even suggest, somewhat surprisingly, brainstorming with the other side. That sounds incredibly risky, though. Confidentiality, protecting your bottom line, not making offers prematurely. How do you manage those risks?
It is more difficult precisely due to those very real risks: inadvertent disclosure, options mistaken for offers. However, it's immensely valuable because it directly produces ideas that consider all interests, and it simultaneously fosters a climate of joint problem solving, educating each side about the other's concerns in real time.
So, high risk, high reward, maybe. How do you protect yourself?
Explicitly distinguish this joint brainstorming session from a formal negotiation session. Make it clear this is idea generation, not commitment. And to further reduce the risk of appearing committed, make it a habit of advancing at least 2 alternative options at the same time, or even options you clearly disagree with, to signal they are purely possibilities being explored, not firm proposals.
Okay, frame it carefully. The coal mine example they give is great here, isn't it?
It's a fantastic example of joint brainstorming between a union and management over unauthorized strikes. Ideas that emerged included things like foremen settling grievances on the spot, using the bathhouse for immediate union meetings, speeding up the grievance procedure, joint training programs, even organizing a union management softball team or an annual picnic.
Things you'd never get from decisional bargaining.
Exactly. Many creative relationship-building ideas that might never have come up otherwise. The language itself in such a session subtly shifts from rigid assertions to open, exploratory questions like, one option we might consider is, what other options have you thought of to address this?
That truly broadens the scope. How else can we broaden our options beyond just a simple list, especially with really complex problems?
You can expand your thinking by consciously shuttling between the specific and the general, using what the authors call the circle chart.
The circle chart.
It's a framework involving 4 types of thinking, moving cyclically. You start with a specific problem, like that smelly, polluted river. Then you move to descriptive analysis, diagnosing it generally, high chemical content, low oxygen. Next, you consider general approaches or prescriptions, reduce effluent, bring fresh water, filtration. Finally, you invent specific feasible actions based on those general approaches. Environmental agency orders factory to limit discharge. City applies for grant. Conservation groups revegetate.
So you cycle between the problem, analysis approaches, and actions.
Exactly. The circle chart allows you to move from one good action idea back to the general theory behind it, and then forward to generate new specific actions based on that refined theory, constantly expanding possibilities.
And the Northern Ireland example they use fits this too, right?
Perfectly. A specific idea. Catholic and Protestant teachers prepare a common history workbook. The general propositions behind it could be common educational content, Catholics and Protestants working together on small projects, promoting understanding in young children. From these general ideas, you could then invent new specific actions, like a joint film project, teacher exchanges, common classes on non-controversial subjects.
Ah, I see. Generating more specifics from the general principle.
You can also consciously change the scope or strength of a proposed agreement, maybe suggesting partial agreements instead of a grand bargain involving fewer parties initially, or making agreements temporary rather than immediately seeking a permanent solution. This flexibility in scope opens up many new avenues.
So beyond just finding shared interests, what's a great way to find mutual gain? You called it a secret negotiation magic trick earlier.
Well, maybe not magic, but very powerful. It's called dovetailing differing interests.
Dovetailing differences. Okay.
This is where the real creative value often lies. You look for situations where what's low cost or easy for you to provide is of high benefit to them, and vice versa. It's not about compromising where you both give up something equally, but about creatively leveraging differences to create more value for everyone.
So differences are good.
Differences are often the key. For instance, capitalize on differences in what parties care about. One side might care more about the form, the other about substance, one about economic factors, the other political optics, immediate future versus distant future, precedent versus this specific case. These provide natural opportunities for efficient trade-offs where both sides feel they've gained something valuable.
Okay. What else?
Or consider different beliefs. If both sides genuinely believe they're right about a future outcome, like which way the market will go, they might agree to let an impartial arbitrator decide later, each confident of victory. This transforms a conflict of belief into a shared commitment to a fair process.
Different values on time.
Huge opportunities there. An installment plan works perfectly because the buyer values paying later more than the slightly higher total price, and the seller values the higher total price more than immediate payment. Both gain from this difference.
Right. Different forecasts.
Another rich area. A star baseball player genuinely expects a career best season. The team owner might forecast fewer wins. They can agree on a base salary plus a performance-based bonus. This manages risk for the team and leverages the player's confidence. A win-win based on differing expectations.
Clever. And finally, differences in aversion to risk.
Yes. In the law of the sea negotiations, mining companies cared intensely about avoiding big upfront losses, high risk aversion. The international community wanted to maximize revenue, the brilliant solution. A system of low royalty rates until the initial investment was fully recovered, then much higher rates thereafter, effectively trading risk for revenue. The company got security, the community got revenue, all designed around their differing risk appetites.
Vive la différence, as the author so aptly put it. It's about celebrating these differences, not fearing them, because they are often the source of genuine value creation.
Exactly.
And lastly, for this pillar, how do we make it truly easy for the other side to say yes? What are the practical steps to smooth that path for them?
It all comes down to consciously putting yourself squarely in their shoes and focusing intently on their decision, not just your own.
Okay, empathy again.
First, whose shoes are you truly in? Are you trying to influence an individual, their absent boss, a large committee? You can't negotiate effectively with an abstraction. Your job might be to subtly strengthen that individual's hand or provide them with the compelling arguments they'll need to persuade others. A British ambassador once humorously described his job as helping my opposite number get new instructions.
Okay, know your audience. What else?
Second, and this is a common pitfall, don't ask for more than you need by padding your requests. Don't inflate your initial price just to leave negotiating room. If you want a horse to jump a fence, you don't raise the fence higher. If you genuinely want 35 cents for a soda, don't market 50 cents. If you do, they'll just treat your stated position as an artificial floor and immediately ask for more, creating unnecessary friction.
Be realistic from the start. Got it.
Third, draft yesable propositions. This means literally writing out proposals that are so clear, so reasonable, so well aligned with interests that they can simply easily say yes to them. Ensure these propositions are sufficient for your needs, realistic for their capabilities, and operational, easily implemented.
Fake it easy for them.
Reduce the number of people whose approval is needed on their side. Make implementation simple. For instance, it's far easier for a company to agree not to interfere with an experimental employee music program than to agree to run it themselves. Simplicity is key.
Okay, fourth.
Fourth, imbue your solutions with legitimacy. Frame your proposed solutions so they clearly appear fair, legal, honorable. Use precedent whenever possible. Look for a decision or statement they made in a similar past situation and subtly base your current proposal on it. This provides an objective standard and makes it significantly easier for them to go along, appealing to their desire for consistency and fairness.
Use their own past actions or standards.
Yeah.
Clever.
Fifth, remember that offers are often far more effective than threats. Focus intently on the positive consequences for them if they agree. How can you make your offers truly credible and appealing? What specific things would they genuinely, maybe credit for proposing the solution, the chance to make the announcement, a specific benefit that costs you little but means a lot to them? Create irresistible incentives for agreement, not punishments for disagreement.
Focus on the carrot, not the stick.
Pretty much. And finally, evaluate your proposal from their point of view. Meticulously anticipate how their critics or internal factions might attack the decision you're asking them to make, and crucially, how they might effectively defend it to those critics.
Think about their internal politics.
Yes. This rigorous exercise helps you generate options that not only meet your core interests, but also sufficiently meet theirs, allowing them to make a decision that is both acceptable to you and easily justifiable, maybe even celebrated, by their constituents. This comprehensive approach dramatically maximizes the likelihood of a resounding yes.
Okay, Pillar 3 was about inventing options. But even with all that incredible creativity, all that meticulous attention to interests and options, sometimes it feels like interests just fundamentally irreconcilably conflict. The landlord wants higher rent, you want lower, you both want the large corner office with a spectacular view. In these situations, it feels like there's simply no win-win, doesn't it? It feels like an undeniable impasse where someone just has to give in.
That's the harsh, honest reality of some situations. It's true. But the powerful insight here is that the solution is not to simply decide based on who has the stronger will, who can be more stubborn, or who can hold out longer.
Battle of wills again.
Exactly. The authors argue very persuasively that deciding on the basis of sheer will is inherently costly, incredibly inefficient, severely damages relationships, and almost invariably leads to arbitrary, often unsustainable outcomes. It's like living on a desert island with no history, no customs, no agreed-upon moral standards, just for a raw, brutal contest of wills where the biggest bully wins.
So the truly groundbreaking alternative is to shift the basis of the negotiation entirely.
Yeah.
Away from that battle.
Yes, to move away from a battle of wills and instead negotiate on some basis that is independent of either side's individual will, something external, impartial, and undeniably fair.
Okay. And that basis is...
That basis is objective criteria. This means you commit yourself and invite them to commit to a solution rooted in principle, not pressure. You are open to reason, to logical persuasion based on external standards, but you are absolutely unequivocally closed to threats, manipulation, or arbitrary demands.
Principle, not pressure.
Exactly. This principled approach consistently produces wiser agreements, achieves them more amicably, and does so far more efficiently. The more you consciously bring in standards of fairness, efficiency, scientific merit, market value, professional norms, the wiser and fairer the eventual agreement will be.
How does it make it more amicable and efficient?
Using established precedents makes agreements less vulnerable to attack, fosters trust, encourages compliance. It's infinitely easier to deal with people when you're both discussing objective standards, like engineers collaborating on a design, rather than desperately trying to force each other to back down.
Right, you're looking at the problem together.
And this also dramatically reduces the need for commitment making and unmaking, leading to far more efficient, productive discussions.
The MIT model for deep-sea bed mining at the Law of the Sea conference is such a fascinating, concrete example here, isn't it?
It really is. India initially proposed a $60 million initial fee for mining. The U.S. vehemently proposed no initial fee, a classic entrenched contest of wills going nowhere. But then they discovered an MIT model that had objectively evaluated various fee proposals and their economic impact.
And independent standards.
Precisely. This model, which was gradually, maybe grudgingly, accepted as objective and legitimate by both sides, showed India that their proposed $60 million fee was astronomically too high, making mining virtually impossible for companies.
Okay.
It also clearly showed the U.S. that some initial fee was, in fact, economically feasible without crippling the industry. Crucially, no one had to back down from a position. No one appeared weak or lost face. They simply became reasonable in the face of compelling, independent evidence.
Wow. The data changed the game.
The model directly led to a mutually satisfactory tentative agreement that was fair to both sides, attractive to companies, and generated considerable revenue for the international community. It strengthened relationships and ensured the agreement's durability precisely because it was based on a mutually agreed-upon objective standard, not political muscle flexing.
So this is a powerful tool. How do we practically develop and then effectively use these objective criteria in our own negotiations day to day?
It involves two main steps. First, developing the criteria, and second, negotiating with them.
Okay, developing first, how?
First, when developing, always strive to find and utilize fair standards. There's usually more than one relevant objective criterion available for any given issue. For a car that's been demolished, potential objective criteria could be original cost minus depreciation, current market value based on similar sales, or its blue book value.
Multiple options.
And a truly critical tool here is the test of reciprocal application. This simply asks, would they be willing to have this very same standard applied to themselves?
The fairness test.
Exactly. If a real estate agent uses a specific standard contract for you, do they honestly use the exact same contract when they buy a house themselves? If not, it's clearly not a truly objective or fair standard. It's a tactic. This test helps expose bias and ensure genuine impartiality.
Okay, fair standards. What about procedures?
Second, develop fair procedures. To produce an outcome independent of will, you can rely on either fair substantive standards like market value or fair procedures. Consider the age-old, remarkably effective way to divide a cake.
One cuts, the other chooses.
Exactly. Neither can genuinely complain about unfair division, as the cutter has an inherent incentive to divide as evenly as possible.
Genius.
This ingenious procedure was applied in the Law of the Sea negotiations for mining sites. Companies proposed 2 promising sites, and the UN then chose one for itself and granted the company the other. Since the company wouldn't know which site it would get, it had every incentive to ensure both sites were as promising as possible, harnessing their expertise for mutual gain. Other procedures include taking turns, drawing lots, or letting a trusted third party decide, an expert, mediator, arbitrator. Professional baseball's last best offer arbitration is another clever procedure. It pressures both parties to make more reasonable proposals, as the arbitrator must choose one of the 2 final offers, not invent their own compromise. This incentivizes reason, not stubbornness.
Okay, so develop fair standards and fair procedures. Now, how do we actually negotiate with them?
Right. Once you have these criteria in mind, here's how to negotiate with objective criteria. 3 fundamental points. First, frame each issue as a joint search for objective criteria.
A joint search.
Instead of accusing or demanding, ask, how did you arrive at that figure? Or what's the principle behind your offer? Treat them as if they, too, are genuinely looking for a fair price or a principled solution based on objective criteria. This invites collaboration. Second, reason, and be open to reason as to which standards are most appropriate and how they should be applied. Agree on the underlying principles first, before getting bogged down in specific numbers. If they propose a standard, use it as a powerful lever.
Use their own standard.
Yes, you might say, you just mentioned that Mr. Jones sold his house down the street for $600,000, and your theory is based on comparable sales. That's a fair principle. So let's look at the actual sales data for the house on the corner of Ellsworth and Oxford, which seems more directly comparable. See? It's not about stubbornly insisting on your standard, but being genuinely willing to respond to reasoned arguments for applying another. You behave much like a judge, predisposed maybe, but open to compelling evidence. It's emphatically not about insisting on your principle as a battle cry.
Be open to reason. Got
Yeah.
it. And the third crucial point.
And third, the non-negotiable ironclad rule. Never yield to pressure, only to principle.
Never yield to pressure, only principle.
Pressure can take many insidious forms: a bribe, a threat, a manipulative appeal to trust, a simple, infuriating refusal to budge. In all these cases, your response is consistent. Invite them to clearly state their reasoning. Suggest objective criteria that you think apply, and steadfastly refuse to budge from your position except on that legitimate, principled basis.
Stand firm on principle.
This is precisely where you gain an undeniable edge, because it is always fundamentally easier to defend a principle than it is to defend an arbitrary refusal or an illegitimate tactic. It's a true manifestation of right makes might.
The detailed example of Tom negotiating his car insurance claim is absolutely perfect here for bringing this concept to life. His parked car was totaled.
Right, great example.
The adjuster, a hard bargainer, offered a paltry $3,300, flatly stating it was company policy.
Classic positional move.
But Tom, having internalized these principles, didn't argue the price directly, didn't get emotional. Instead, he calmly, pointedly asked, what standard did you use to arrive at that figure? And critically, where can I buy a comparable car for that much today?
Asking for the criteria. Brilliant.
He politely but firmly insisted on fair compensation based on objective, verifiable criteria, market value, not an arbitrary figure or a test of wills. And the payoff, he walked out with an $8,024 check. That's transformative.
It is. This story, and so many others, clearly demonstrate that principled negotiation is, quite simply, a dominant strategy over positional bargaining. It allows you to hold your own, to stand firm on what you deserve, and still be impeccably fair and reasonable. It effectively gives you a hard-hearted partner in the form of objective principle itself. If the other side genuinely won't budge on principle after all your efforts, then and only then do you soberly evaluate your best alternative, your BAT&A, against their unmoving position. Hashtag, tag, 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 32.
Yes, BTT, addressing common challenges.
Okay, those 4 pillars are incredibly powerful. Principled negotiation. But even with all these tools and detailed strategies, the real world loves to throw curveballs, right?
Always does. What if you're facing a situation where the other side seems to have all the power, all the leverage? It can feel like you're trying to grow lilies in a desert, with the odds stacked hopelessly against you. What then? Hashtag, tag, tag, A. What if they are more powerful? Develop your BATNA.
Yeah, that's a very real concern and a valid one. No method, no matter how brilliant, can guarantee success if all the leverage is truly unequivocally on one side. You simply can't grow lilies in a desert.
Right.
However, this method, principled negotiation, can absolutely protect you from entering into bad agreements that you would ultimately regret.
Okay, protection.
And it can help you make the absolute most of whatever assets, whatever leverage you do possess, so that any agreement you do reach will satisfy your interests as well as humanly possible. This protection is crucial because a major danger when faced with a perceived power imbalance is being too accommodating, too quick to just get it over with and accept whatever is offered, simply out of a sense of helplessness.
And this means avoiding those rigid bottom lines. Right? We touched on this, but why are bottom lines bad again? They seem protective.
They seem protective, but they actually limit you. A bottom line, by its very definition, is a position that is rigidly not to be changed.
Right.
Fixed. This means that once you've set it, you tend to shut your ears to new information that might come up during the negotiation, or to creative solutions that could lead to a far superior outcome. It also severely inhibits imagination, precisely because it removes the incentive to invent a tailor-made solution that could reconcile differing interests far more advantageously than a simple number. Most real-world negotiations involve multiple variables. Selling a house for $160,000 might actually be less attractive than selling it for $135,000, but with, say, a first right of refusal on resale, or a delayed closing, or the right to use the barn for 2 years. A fixed bottom line prevents this kind of flexible, inventive thinking. It's an arbitrarily selected figure, not a true measure of what you should accept.
Okay, so bottom lines are out. What's the alternative?
The powerful alternative, the true antidote, is knowing your BTNA. Best alternative to a negotiated agreement.
BATNA. Okay, heard this acronym before. Best alternative.
To a negotiated agreement. This is the objective standard, the benchmark, against which any proposed agreement should be measured. It's not what you ought to get or what you hope for. It's simply what you will do if you don't reach an agreement.
What you'll do if talks fail.
Exactly. If selling your house for $160,000 isn't as attractive as renting it out for a year while the market recovers, then renting it is your BTNA. It functions as a protective shield, safeguarding you from accepting unfavorable terms, and simultaneously acts as a compass, ensuring you don't mistakenly reject good ones. It's flexible, allowing you to compare any proposal against your actual real-world alternatives.
The insecurity of an unknown BTNA sounds like negotiating completely blind, though, like with your eyes closed.
It absolutely is.
We might be wildly too optimistic about vague alternatives. Oh, I could always just move to California. Or, maybe more commonly, far too pessimistic about the real consequences of not agreeing. If I don't take this deal, I'll be sued, they'll strike, everything will crumble. That sounds like a recipe for consistently bad decisions.
Precisely. If you haven't meticulously thought through and researched what you will genuinely do if you fail to reach an agreement, you are indeed negotiating with your eyes completely closed, essentially leaving your fate to chance. You might carelessly lump together vague options and overestimate their collective attractiveness, when in reality you can only choose one. Or, more commonly, you might be unduly pessimistic about what would truly happen if negotiations broke off, making you far too eager to agree to anything just to escape the perceived uncertainty.
So what can help with that uncertainty?
That's why forming a tripwire can be incredibly useful. A far from perfect agreement that's still demonstrably better than your actual BTNA. It serves as an early warning system, signaling when you're approaching the edge of what you can accept, giving you a chance to reevaluate.
A tripwire?
Yeah.
Okay. So the better your BTNA, the greater your negotiating power. It's not inherently about wealth or resources.
Not necessarily, no.
But fundamentally about how attractive, how compelling the option of not reaching an agreement truly is for you. This completely flips the traditional understanding of power.
It absolutely does. Consider the wealthy tourist in Bombay trying to buy a brass pot from a local vendor.
Okay.
The vendor may be incredibly poor in material wealth, but he is incredibly powerful in that specific negotiation because he intimately knows his local market and has attractive alternatives. He can confidently sell that same pot to another tourist tomorrow.
Right. He has a good BTNA.
The wealthy tourist, conversely, if he hasn't bothered to research what a comparable pot would cost elsewhere or what his alternatives are, is comparatively weak, despite his vast wealth. His money doesn't translate into negotiating power unless he uses it intelligently to research and develop his alternatives.
Makes sense. And the town example.
Similarly, think of that small town negotiating factory taxes with a huge, seemingly dominant corporation. Despite its economic dependence, the town had immense power because it had meticulously developed a clear, attractive BTNA. Expand town limits to include the factory and tax it at a much higher residential rate. Their attractive BTNA was their true strength, allowing them to gain significant concessions despite the apparent imbalance.
Wow. Okay, so BTNA is power. How do we practically develop a strong BTNA? It sounds like it takes deliberate, systematic effort, not just idle wishing.
It absolutely does. It's a three-step process requiring foresight and effort. First, invent a comprehensive list of actions you might conceivably take if no agreement is reached. Brainstorm wildly. What could you do if this job offer falls through? What are all the other potential jobs?
List the possibilities.
Second, improve promising ideas from that list by converting them into truly practical, actionable alternatives. If you initially thought, I could always move to another city, actually go out and get a real job offer there. For a union, this means formally authorizing a strike vote if necessary to make it a credible alternative.
Make them real options.
And third, select the best option among your realistic, improved alternatives. This is your definitive BTNA, the one you plan to pursue if the current negotiations fail. Having gone through this rigorous effort, you now possess a powerful BTNA against which to objectively measure every offer you receive.
Okay, invent, improve, select. And once you have this clear BTNA, should you strategically tell the other side what it is? That seems like a very important strategic disclosure. When do you reveal it?
Yeah, that's a key question. It absolutely depends on the situation. If your BTNA is extremely attractive, if you genuinely have another customer waiting with a better offer, it is almost certainly in your interest to let them know, either directly or indirectly.
Let them know you have options.
Right. If they mistakenly think you lack a good alternative when you in fact have a strong one, you should certainly disclose it. It will significantly strengthen your hand. However, if your best alternative is actually worse than they currently think, disclosing it will weaken rather than strengthen your hand. So in that case, keep it to yourself.
Okay, makes sense.
Also, make sure to consider their BTNA. They may be overly optimistic about their options, and you can subtly try to lower their expectations. Or even...
Wait, you can actually change their BTNA.
Yeah.
That sounds like a very powerful, proactive, almost aggressive move.
Sometimes, yes. If, for instance, a community group wants a large power plant to take their environmental concerns seriously, and the plant's current BTNA is simply to ignore them and proceed with construction.
Right, just bulldoze ahead.
The group might have to file a formal lawsuit to revoke the construction permit. This action immediately forces the plant to consider a far less attractive alternative, a costly, time-consuming legal battle. This tactic, while potentially adversarial, can be used strategically to ensure a fairer outcome, though it must, of course, be used carefully and ethically.
Wow. Actively shaping their alternative.
Yeah.
Okay, this all raises an important final question for this section. When does it genuinely make sense not to negotiate at all? Is there a point where you simply walk away before you even start?
Yeah, that's a good question. It makes perfect sense not to invest much time and energy if your BTNA is already quite fine and the current negotiation looks genuinely unpromising or unlikely to yield a better outcome. Why waste your time?
Right. If your alternative is great, maybe don't bother.
Conversely, if your BTNA is truly awful, you should be willing to invest significantly more time and creative effort, even if the negotiation initially looks unpromising, to meticulously test whether something more satisfactory might possibly be worked out. You have less to lose by trying. The bank negotiating with that bankrupt energy company provides a stark lesson. They failed because they didn't clearly assess their own BTNA or the company's. The company stonewalled because their BTNA was simply to wait for oil prices to rise, then pay off the loan and keep 100% of their company. The bank mistakenly assumed negotiating directly with the company was their only choice when they could have negotiated with the judge to make the situation appealable. They didn't explore their alternatives properly.
And governments make this mistake too.
Often, assuming a viable military option always exists if political or economic means fail. But there isn't always a truly viable military option, as tragically seen in many hostage situations where safe retrieval isn't guaranteed and force can worsen outcomes. You must meticulously think it through. Can your objective be achieved solely through your own unilateral efforts? Or does the other side genuinely need to make a decision or take an action? If the latter, whose decision will you influence? What specific decision do you want them to make? And how, if at all, could force or threats help influence it? Don't assume either that you have a BATNA better than negotiating, or, crucially, that you don't. Think it through, assess it realistically, and then decide whether negotiating makes strategic sense. ### B. What if they won't play? Use negotiation jujitsu.
Okay, BATNA is critical, especially when power seems unbalanced. But what if you enter negotiation armed with all these principled tools focusing on interests, options, criteria, but the other side stubbornly refuses to play by these rules?
They just dig in their heels.
What if they stick rigidly to positional bargaining, announcing firm, unyielding positions, attacking your ideas, or even attacking you personally? It feels like they're trying to drag you back into their old, unproductive game. How do you respond without falling into their trap?
You've precisely articulated the dilemma. If you respond in kind, if you push back with your own rigid positions, defend your ideas defensively, or counterattack personally, you fall right into their game.
Yeah, you get sucked in.
And this inevitably leads to a vicious cycle of attack and defense, wasting immense time and energy, and often destroying any chance of a wise agreement. The absolute key here is to consciously break that cycle by refusing to react.
Don't take the bait.
Exactly. Instead, you use what the authors call negotiation jujitsu.
Negotiation jujitsu. Okay, I like the sound of that.
You sidestep their attack and subtly deflect its force against the problem itself. You don't pit your strength directly against theirs. Instead, you elegantly channel their momentum, their energy, into exploring interests, inventing options, and searching for independent standards. Just like in the martial art of jujitsu, you use their own momentum against them to maintain your balance and achieve your objective.
That's a great metaphor. But how does that sidestepping and deflecting actually work in practice? What does it truly look like when they're coming at you with all that positional force?
Well, typically, their attack will consist of 3 common maneuvers. First, asserting their position forcefully. Second, attacking your ideas. And third, attacking you personally.
Okay. Position ideas you.
Let's look at how to deal with each using negotiator in jujitsu. First, don't attack their position. Instead, look behind it.
Look behind the position. How?
When they state their position, neither immediately accept it nor vehemently reject it. Instead, treat it as just one possible option that addresses some underlying concern. Your questions become your powerful tools. Ask why. Or, how do you think that specific position addresses the problem at hand?
Probe the interests again.
Yes. Assume, at least initially, that it's a genuine, if perhaps clumsy, attempt to address some legitimate concern. For example, if a school board proposes only a $1,000 raise, don't just say, that's not enough. Ask, what budget trade-offs were involved in arriving at that figure? How will this particular amount help us keep our salaries competitive in the region, which I know is a shared goal?
Connect it back to interests or criteria.
Or, if they insist on sole control over layoff, and ask, how could you ensure our teachers that your evaluation procedure would be genuinely fair and objective? We believe you personally would be fair, but what if you left? What system would protect fairness in the long run? Always seek out the principles, the interests, the concerns underlying their stated positions.
Okay. What about that Nasser example? That seemed like looking behind a position.
It's a remarkable way to do it. Discuss, hypothetically, what would truly happen if one of their rigid positions was simply accepted without concession. When that American lawyer asked President Nasser what would happen to Golda Meir if she just withdrew from all territory with no deal, Nasser paused, then burst out laughing, acknowledging, oh, she would certainly have trouble at home. That simple hypothetical, without any direct attack, helped Nasser viscerally understand the unrealistic nature of his own demand by forcing him to consider it from her perspective and her political realities. That's pure jujitsu.
That's brilliant. Okay, so don't attack their position, look behind it. What about when they attack your ideas?
Second, don't defensively defend your ideas. Instead, invite criticism and advice.
Invite criticism.
That feels counterintuitive.
It does. A tremendous amount of negotiation time is unfortunately spent simply criticizing proposals. Rather than instinctively resisting their criticism, actively invite it. When they criticize your proposal, genuinely ask them what specifically is wrong with it from their perspective. What concerns of yours would this salary proposal fail to take into account?
Okay.
Then rework your ideas if possible, based on their valuable input. This ingenious approach transforms criticism from an obstacle into an essential, even desired ingredient for mutual improvement.
Turn criticism into collaboration.
Or turn it around and ask for their advice directly. If you were in our shoes with our budget constraints and our mandates, what would you do to solve this problem? This powerful question makes them confront your half of the problem and potentially invent solutions that meet your concerns because they're now operating from a problem-solving mindset.
Put them in your shoes.
Yeah.
Okay. And the third attack, when they attack you personally.
Third, and this is crucial when things get personal, recast an attack on you as an attack on the problem itself.
Don't take it personally. Easier said than done.
It is. But when they resort to personal insults, character assassinations, or veiled threats, resist that powerful urge to defend yourself or counterattack. Instead, listen carefully, show you understand their emotional state, then calmly reframe their attack.
How? Give me an example.
If they say, your insistence on a strike clearly shows you don't care about the children's education, you could respond, when you say that, I genuinely hear your deep concern about the children's education. We absolutely share that concern. Given our shared interest in the children, what can we both do right now to reach an agreement quickly and get them back in school?
Deflect it back to the shared problem. Nice.
You gracefully deflect their personal attack by redirecting their energy and words back to the shared objective problem.
Okay. Any other jujitsu moves?
Finally, and these are two remarkably powerful, often overlooked tools. Ask questions and then pause.
Questions and silence.
Yes. Questions, unlike statements, generate answers. Statements often generate immediate resistance. Questions, particularly open-ended ones, offer no direct target for them to strike at and learn to use silence.
Silence is powerful.
Incredibly, if they make an unreasonable proposal or give an insufficient, vague answer, just wait. People, universally, feel deeply uncomfortable with prolonged silence in a conversation and often feel compelled to break it by offering more information, additional justifications, or even a new, more reasonable suggestion.
Let the silence do the work.
If a teacher's representative asks, why shouldn't teachers have a fundamental say in layoff policy? And the school board chairman is vague or defensive, a long, expectant silence will often prompt him to elaborate, clarify, or offer a more constructive response. Some of the most effective, pivotal negotiation happens when you are not saying a single word.
That's incredibly insightful. Negotiation jujitsu. But what if, despite all these direct efforts and clever tactics, they still stubbornly won't budge? They just won't play by these principled rules. What's the ultimate trump card, the final procedure, when communication truly breaks down?
Then you might consider initiating the one-text procedure, often, though not always, involving a third party.
The one-text procedure.
This procedure is particularly useful when parties are deeply entrenched in their positions, or when a negotiation is complex with multiple issues and parties, and communication has completely broken down into endless arguments.
This reminds me of that classic scenario of a husband and wife trying to design their dream home. Each gets absolutely stuck on their ideal, rigid vision, drawing up separate, inflexible plans.
Right. Leads to arguments, hurt feelings.
And a complete failure to achieve their shared goal of a beautiful home.
It's the perfect analogy. An architect using the one-text procedure would never, ever ask the husband and wife about their respective positions on the house design. Instead, they would meticulously inquire about their underlying interests.
Back to interests.
Not how big a bay window do you want, but why does she want bay window? Is it for morning sun or afternoon light? Is it to look out or create a cozy reading nook? They'd explore the husband's practical needs for garage storage or his desire for a quiet den. The architect then, acting as a neutral facilitator, creates a single initial draft plan, explicitly stating that it is incomplete, imperfect, subject to change. They then ask only for criticism, not for commitment.
Criticism, not commitment. Key difference.
This meticulously separates the act of inventing from the act of deciding, allowing both spouses to freely critique and collaboratively shape the evolving plan jointly without ever having to abandon their initial entrenched positions. The architect iteratively refines the text based on their feedback, incorporating successive improvements until finally presenting a recommended plan that genuinely incorporates everyone's input and addresses their core interests.
And then the spouses just have one decision.
Exactly, a simple yes or no to the final collaboratively built text.
And the most famous, powerful example of this in real-world diplomacy is undoubtedly the Camp David Accords, right? Where the U.S. mediated between Egypt and Israel.
It's the classic example. The American team, led by Jimmy Carter, famously went through 23 meticulous drafts of a single negotiating text over 13 grueling days, relentlessly refining it until both sides could finally say yes to a mutually satisfactory and indeed historic agreement.
23 drafts. Wow.
It's a testament to the sheer power of this structured approach. This procedure significantly simplifies even the most complex multilateral negotiations by dramatically reducing the number of individual decisions needed, and crucially, by preventing parties from prematurely getting locked into rigid positions.
Can you use it if there's no third party?
You can even start using it unilaterally. Simply prepare a comprehensive draft of what you believe a fair agreement would look like, and then ask the other side for their criticism and input, thereby subtly changing the game yourself.
Okay. The book includes that brilliant, incredibly detailed case study of Frank Turnbull negotiating with his seemingly intractable landlady, Mrs. Jones, over rent control. It truly brings all these concepts to life. Mrs. Jones was initially hostile, very much a positional bargainer. But Turnbull, through sheer discipline, used principled negotiation to secure a significant rent reimbursement.
It's an indispensable masterclass in applied principled negotiation. Turnbull consistently and remarkably applies every one of these pillars, even when Mrs. Jones is overtly hostile, demonstrating exactly how to change the game effectively against strong resistance.
Can we break down some of his key phrases? How did he do it?
Absolutely. Let's look at some highlights. First, he uses, please correct me if I'm wrong.
Simple phrase. Why is it effective?
It establishes an immediate dialogue based on reason. By cautiously treating facts as potentially inaccurate and explicitly inviting correction, he subtly shifts the dynamic from confrontation to joint fact-finding. He's inviting her participation without making her feel attacked.
Okay, what else?
Then, we appreciate what you've done for us. This offers genuine personal support, very carefully separating her as a person from the problem. It cleverly diffuses perceived threats to her self-image, making her inherently more conciliatory by giving her a psychological stake in his approval.
Soft on the person.
Exactly. His core message. Our concern is fairness. He takes a clear, principled stand, makes it unequivocally clear he's open to persuasion only on the basis of principle, not arbitrary demands. Frames the discussion on higher ground. When Mrs. Jones, in a classic dirty trick, dismisses his principled stance as a charade, Turnbull doesn't get defensive. Instead, he calmly responds, "We would like to settle this on the basis not of selfish interest and power, but of principle." He explains his sincere interest in fairness, even citing his own self-interest, avoiding court. This is negotiation jujitsu, deflecting her personal attack by calmly bringing it back to merits and shared consequences.
Nice redirection. What about trust?
When she tries to manipulate him by questioning his trust, "You don't trust me, do you?" he skillfully retorts. Trust is a separate issue. He thanks her, but quickly defines trust as largely irrelevant to the underlying principle of fair rent, redirecting firmly back to objective considerations. He doesn't let it become about feelings.
Keep it on principle.
He consistently asks, "What's the principle behind your action?" He assumes there must be good reasons for her position, forcing her to articulate them, keeping the discussion rigorously focused on merits.
Makes her justify her position.
He uses active listening. Let me see if I follow what you're saying. He meticulously restates her arguments positively to ensure understanding, making her more receptive to his views. Only once she feels heard can he effectively introduce his own arguments.
Listening is key.
He wisely says, "Let me get back to you." This avoids immediate pressure to decide, creates valuable time and distance, allows clear thinking, demonstrates control. He sets a definite time to resume, showing decisiveness.
Buys time strategically.
Crucially, present all your reasons first. He explains in meticulous detail why his calculation for reimbursement is fair before stating the figure, ensures she listens to the justification rather than immediately dismissing a number she dislikes.
Sequence again. Justify, then propose.
When making his proposal, one fair solution might be, presents it not as a rigid demand, but as a thoughtfully considered option, specific enough to be clear, flexible enough to invite consideration.
Makes it feel collaborative.
He clearly outlines consequences. If we agree, if we disagree. Makes it easier for her to say yes by articulating the positive outcome of agreement and the objective, legally backed consequences of no agreement. Referral to a hearing examiner attributed to external authority. He subtly influences her BDNA without disclosing his own.
Smart.
Finally, as they reach resolution, we'd be happy to see if we can leave when it's most convenient for you. Invites her input on a shared interest, moving out smoothly. Allows her to save face, feel good about the agreement, turning potential contention into mutual gain.
Giving her some control.
And the very final touch. It's been a pleasure dealing with you. Ends on a genuinely conciliatory note, preserving the working relationship, showing that dealing with a tough problem rigorously on merits can still lead to an amicable resolution.
That's an astonishingly clear, detailed breakdown of applying these principles in a truly challenging situation. It so powerfully illustrates how you can shift the entire game, even facing resistance. That's a masterclass. #C. What if they use dirty tricks?
Taming the hard bargainer.
So we've covered the core method, how to deal with unwilling parties. But what about the final frontier? Dirty tricks.
Ah, yes, the nasty stuff.
These are precisely what they sound like. Tactics designed specifically to take unfair advantage. They range from deliberate deception about facts or authority to psychological abuse like creating stressful situations or personal attacks, or aggressive positional pressure tactics like extreme demands or lock-in ploys.
And what makes them dirty?
They're inherently illegitimate because they fail the fundamental test of reciprocity. They're meant for only one side to use, and you would never, ever want them used against.
Right, you wouldn't want it done to you. So how do people usually react? Most people's gut reactions are either to passively put up with them, hoping they'll just go away, or that appeasement will work. Like Neville Chamberlain with Hitler, perhaps.
Yeah, not a great outcome.
Or, conversely, to respond in kind, escalating the conflict into an even nastier, more destructive battle.
Fight fire with fire.
But the authors suggest we should instead elevate the discussion and negotiate about the rules of the game themselves.
Negotiate the negotiation process.
Exactly. Tricky bargaining tactics are, in essence, one-sided proposals about the negotiation procedure. To effectively counter them, you simply engage in principled negotiation about the negotiating process itself.
Okay, how? What are the steps?
3 essential steps. First, recognize the tactic. Be acutely aware of what they're doing. Second, raise the issue explicitly. Bring it up directly and calmly. And third, question its legitimacy and desirability, effectively negotiating over the procedure itself, saying, is this how we want to conduct this important negotiation?
Recognize, raise, question. And crucially, we apply the very same 4 pillars of principled negotiation to this metagame, right?
Precisely. You use their own principles against their underhanded tactics, making them accountable to a higher standard.
How does that look?
You separate the people from the problem by questioning the tactic, not their inherent integrity. If you find yourself blinded by the sun, you don't accuse them. You politely say, I'm finding the sun distracting. Shall we revise the schedule or meet elsewhere tomorrow?
Okay.
You focus on interests. Why are you committing yourself in the press to such an extreme position before we've discussed it? Is it to protect yourself from criticism? Is it truly in our mutual interest to use this tactic? You invent options for mutual gain regarding the process. How about we agree to no statements to the press from either side until we reach agreement?
Set ground rules.
And you insist on objective criteria for the procedure. Apply the principle of reciprocity directly. If they've made you uncomfortable, maybe playfully say, you sit in this chair tomorrow morning. Frame it as a proposed rule. Shall we alternate spilling coffee on one another as a strategy?
Okay. And if that fails?
As a truly last resort, if these efforts fail and the dirty tactics persist, you must be prepared to turn to your BATNA and, if necessary, walk out, clearly stating why. This often brings them back to the table if they are genuinely interested in reaching an agreement.
Okay. So can we run through some common dirty tricks and how to counter them specifically?
Let's categorize them for clarity. First, there's deliberate deception. Phony facts. Simple rule. Never trust blindly unless you have good reason. Always verify factual assertions independently. You don't have to call them a liar, just state it's standard practice to verify. Ambiguous authority. Never assume they have full authority. Inquire up front. Just how much authority do you have to commit? If they spring it on you after a deal claiming, my boss needs to approve it, insist on reciprocity, okay, then it's a joint draft and I'll need to reconsider it too. Dubious intentions. If you fear they won't comply, build specific compliance features into the agreement itself. Contingent terms, like equity in a house if child support isn't paid. If they insist on their trustworthiness, say, great, then you won't mind a contingent agreement, will you? Just good business. Note, less than full disclosure is not the same as deception.
Okay, deception covered. What about psychological warfare? That sounds nasty.
It can be. Examples include stressful situations. Be aware of deliberate physical discomfort, noisy room, bad chair, temperature extremes. Calmly speak up. Suggest changes based on principle. Personal attacks. Recognize them as attempts to rattle you. Don't defend, don't counterattack. Explicitly bring it up and then change the subject. Acknowledge the attack, pivot back to substance. Good guy, bad guy routine. Recognize this classic manipulation. When the good guy makes their pitch, ask them for the objective principle behind their offer, just like you would the bad guy. Don't fall for the contrast. Threats. Highly abused, almost always escalate conflict. Good negotiators rarely use them. Instead, use warnings, consequences that will naturally occur independently of your will if no agreement is reached. Should we fail to agree, it seems highly probable the media would insist on publishing the story. Ignore threats or even turn them into an advantage. They're resorting to threats because they have a weak case. Be principled. My reputation is built on not responding to threats. I only respond to reason.
Okay, warnings, not threats. Makes sense. And the last category, positional pressure tactics.
Right. These are designed to structure the situation so only one side can make concessions. Examples. Refusal to negotiate. Recognize it as a ploy. Explore their underlying interests in not negotiating. Suggest alternatives like third-party mediation. Insist on principles. Is this refusal how they'd want you to play? Extreme demands. Aims to lower your expectations. Counter by calmly asking for principled justification until their position seems ridiculous. Escalating demands. When they raise demands after every concession, call out the tactic directly. Take a firm break. Insist on principle upon resuming. Lock-in tactics, making it impossible for themselves to yield like a public pledge. High-stakes gambles. You can interrupt their communication, joke about it, resist on principle, or find a face-saving way for them to back down gracefully. Hard-hearted partner, my boss won't let me. Recognize it. Try to get the negotiator to agree to the principle. Then, if possible, seek permission to speak directly to the hard-hearted partner or give the negotiator arguments. Calculated delay. Postponing decisions hoping for advantage. Counter by creating fading opportunities, negotiating with a third party, or using objective deadlines, tax dates, contract ends. Take it or leave it. Common, but not interactive. You can ignore it and keep talking, or bring it up directly while subtly reminding them what they lose if no deal, and offer a face-saving way out to continue negotiating.
Wow, that's a whole arsenal of tricks they might use. Ultimately, the authors say, the overarching message for all these tactics is clear. Don't be a victim. This seems to be the underlying empowering message you've given us throughout this entire deep dive.
It absolutely is, and it applies not just to external tactics, but to your own internal ethical boundaries. You must consciously decide what your own ethical lines are.
How do you do that?
Ask yourself, would I genuinely use this tactic with a good friend or family member whom I respect? Would I be truly embarrassed if the full, unvarnished account of my negotiation tactics appeared prominently in tomorrow's newspaper? These questions help illuminate your own internal values. Be prepared, and indeed willing, to fight against dirty bargaining tactics, but always do so on principle. It is always inherently easier to defend a legitimate principle than it is to defend an arbitrary refusal or an illegitimate deceptive tactic. You can be just as firm as they are, often even firmer, when you stand on the solid ground of principle. #tag. In conclusion, key takeaways.
This has been an incredibly insightful, truly deep dive into getting to yes. I feel like I've not just learned, but genuinely gained a brand new toolkit for navigating virtually any conflict or agreement. It makes so much intuitive sense, connecting ideas that seem disparate into a deeply practical, coherent framework.
Indeed it has. And the authors themselves suggest there's probably nothing in this book that you, our listener, didn't already know at some fundamental intuitive level.
Really, it feels pretty revolutionary.
Well, the genius of getting to yes lies not just in inventing entirely new concepts, but in brilliantly organizing common sense and common human experience into a truly usable, actionable framework for thinking and acting in negotiations. It resonates so powerfully precisely because it aligns so well with that intuitive wisdom. It's why so many skilled professionals, upon reading it, often remark, now I finally know what I have been doing and why it sometimes works so well.
So it's not about being some kind of naturally gifted, charismatic negotiator?
Not primarily, no.
but rather about consciously learning and meticulously practicing these skills, much like an athlete trains or a musician practices.
Right.
Reading the playbook, as we've done today, is truly just the very first step.
Absolutely. Reading alone will not make you skillful. Consistent, deliberate practice will. You need to make a conscious investment in these new approaches. After each significant negotiation you engage in, make it a habit to rigorously review your performance.
Like a debrief.
Exactly. What worked well? What didn't go as planned? What might you have done differently applying these principles? Consider keeping a dedicated negotiation journal to track your progress, your insights, your challenges, and critically, meticulously prepare for every negotiation, big or small.
Preparation is key.
Plan precisely how you'll build relationships. List interests for both sides. Brainstorm and invent a range of options. Research objective benchmarks. Even role-playing, perhaps just by yourself or with a trusted friend, can be incredibly valuable for testing your case and practicing these techniques. The more prepared and deliberate you are, the more likely you are to use these ideas, find immense value in them, and achieve genuinely wise agreements.
And speaking of winning, the authors share such a powerful, poignant story about a British man watching a father and son playing Frisbee in Hyde Park, who innocently asks, "Who's winning?" Feels like that applies perfectly here.
That's a profoundly powerful analogy because it cuts straight to the heart of the matter. In most instances, asking who's winning a negotiation is as utterly inappropriate and even damaging as asking who's winning a marriage.
Good point.
If you find yourself asking that question about your marriage, you've already lost the more important negotiation, the fundamental one, about what kind of game you should both be playing, and, crucially, how you deal with each other's complex web of shared and differing interests. It's not about one side beating the other. It's about building and creating value together.
So what does this all mean for you, our listener? What's the ultimate, concise takeaway from this entire deep dive into getting to yes? What should people remember?
The ultimate power in negotiation comes not from crudely forcing your will upon another, nor from simply being the stronger party in terms of resources or leverage. Instead, it flows from having the incredible clarity to meticulously know your own best alternatives, your bêtiner.
Know your bêtiner.
And then cultivating the profound skill to persuade others through legitimate reasons, objective criteria, and the deliberate creation of mutually beneficial solutions. This deep dive has meticulously shown you, step by detailed step, precisely how to achieve both. How to get what you fundamentally deserve, and how to do so while remaining decent, honorable, and without sacrificing one for the other.
Get what you deserve and be decent.
It's a transformative way to change the very game of negotiation and to consistently strive for outcomes that leave everyone involved feeling respected, satisfied, and committed, even when interests initially appear to be deeply conflicted.
So the next time you face a difficult conversation or a seemingly intractable dispute,
Ask yourself with newfound clarity, am I playing the right game? And can I consciously, skillfully shift it from a destructive battle of wills to a collaborative, value-creating search for wise solutions? The answer, as Getting to Yes so brilliantly reveals, is almost always within your grasp.